All right, here we go. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the struggle for Africa, Russia and the United States. More so, concentrating on how Russia's complete failure in Africa is showing. And it's getting worse and worse daily. Now, there's a lot to cover in this video, so please stick with me. Thank you for joining live. Please like the live stream. It helps out a lot. And I hope we can all learn something together. And so wish me luck because we got a lot of material to cover. Now, first things first. This is the man right here. The guy who used to be in charge of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Everyone knows who this guy is. Everyone knows who he is. And again, if you're watching live, please like the live. I really want to push this out, and hopefully we can all learn something. And I'll try to answer as many questions as you have. This guy right here was the one who was in charge of the conquest of Africa, bringing Russia into Africa, and it just is not working out. Based off of the evidence, based off of the data, based off of countries falling apart, it's getting worse and worse for Russia. And I'm not just saying that. So I want to run through the history, and we can see how just by one guy, his plane crashing has caused turmoil for the Russians. And it's, again, you'll see what I'm talking about when we get into all of this. Now, to bring you up to speed, first things first, and again, thank you so much for being here. Mali, the country of Mali, Africa, is probably the most studied country when it comes to Russian ties into Africa. You can see direct correlation upon as soon as Wagner went into Mali, things started to get worse and worse. Now, a couple of days ago from the time of this live stream and video, you have Wagner fighters who have been ambushed. You have equipment that's been stolen. And the thing is this. Ever since Wagner again went into Mali, they've been attacked more and more. There's been less restrictions on militant groups. There's been more attacks in regions that have never been attacked before. And so we have reason to believe, again, with direct evidence and correlation, that pretty much anywhere Russia goes, things get worse. And I know that's like the narrative that Russia's the bad guy, they're the bad people. But in this case, in Africa especially, things are getting worse. Now, let's start from the very beginning. How the heck did Wagner come to be? Because Wagner's mission was not always Africa. Africa was never on the drawing board, as far as we know, with Wagner. And again, please like the live stream, everybody. It helps out a lot. And I will try to answer questions as we go. Thank you so much. Understand this. Wagner was not known as Wagner in 2014. They were known as the Green Men. And so whenever we talk about the Ukrainian conflict and Russia, we tend to think, oh, this only started about a year ago, but this is not true. You actually had the annex of, anybody know? What was it the annex of? What was the first territory? What was the first territory taken over in Ukraine? Can somebody answer that question? Does anybody know? Who really knows their Ukrainian history? There was one territory that was annexed. Somebody says Donbass. Is that true? There was one territory where they just marched on in. Hey, thank you so much for the $2 donation. Don't get thrown off. You threw me off. Every time you guys donate, it throws me off because I appreciate that. Thank you. That's right, Crimea. I'll try to make this interactive. Crimea, these guys walked right into Crimea, but they weren't known as Wagner. They were known as the Little Green Men, the Green Men. And one way these guys were actually tracked was through dating apps like Tinder or Facebook. At the time, Facebook, you could actually track where people were until Facebook actually managed to cover your tracks a little bit. But that was one way the Little Green Men were actually being tracked by independent sources from Ukraine themselves around 2014. So Crimea, for those of you who are not aware, Crimea is in the southern portion of Ukraine, heavily contested today. And so Crimea was a great case study to see how Wagner has a lot of confidence. They have some sort of ability. They have some sort of backing. And the Little Green Men, they must be a part of the Russians. But who are they? Because it's illegal to fight in a conflict without some sort of, what's the word? They didn't have Russian flags. They didn't have any sort of markings or identification. So it was a bit of a confusing situation. Nonetheless, today, Crimea is in the news constantly. You have attacks happening in Crimea. Crimea is where you have these deep, warm water ports. That's why you're seeing a lot of Russian ships being taken out left and right, because that's where they repair their ships. And so now, at this point, around 2014, 2015, unverified, verified. Sorry. Let me go to my next point. We got a lot of stuff to cover. were in Syria. Before Wagner even went into Africa, Wagner made their mark in Syria. And still up until this point, we don't necessarily know what Wagner's all about. The CIA, State Department, has been tracking Wagner. But nonetheless, a really interesting thing about Wagner in Syria, before we go down to Africa, because this is all correlating, we were fighting alongside Wagner, if you will. When I say we, the United States, the U.S. military and Wagner were fighting the same people in Syria. It's the really bad guys that start with the letter I. As you know, you can't say certain words on here. And so we have a really weird relationship at this point of, okay, I guess things are working out with Wagner. I guess the United States and the Russians are both, they're being cordial. Now, can somebody tell me in the comments, what happened where the friction started? What was the battle where Wagner and the United States actually went head to head? Does anybody know? Anybody know the name? Anybody remember? The Battle of Kasham. Heavily documented, where the United States Special Forces out of nowhere were attacked. Sorry, somebody had it. Kasham. At this point, and actually this is a memorial. Wagner Group put up this memorial. Wagner had the guts and the cojones to try attacking the United States, unknowing that the U.S. Special Forces tend to have every single asset to their disposal, whether it's a 5-man team or a 50-man team. Wagner got annihilated, but the point of this story is, even though there are two people who are fighting the same enemy, motivations and motives really is what dictates their relationship. Prime example, the Soviets and the United States were fighting the common enemy in World War II. After the war was over, as you guys all know, the Cold War started, and we've had a lot of issues. I put Winston Churchill up here. Shout out to the British. Shout out to all the Brits out there. He was the only guy who was like, hey, we need to fight the Soviets because I know that we're apparently friends and we work together, but I'm letting you guys know right now, it's not all dandelions. Everybody called him crazy, and we would be living in a totally different world. There would be no Soviet Union. And again, I understand in the context, it was a very odd move to fight the guys who just helped save Eastern Europe. But nonetheless, there was Winston was the one guy who was like, hey, we need to keep pushing. So, these right here are the countries where Wagner operates in. You have to understand, Russia has a really big footprint in Africa. Now, this map is a little outdated. The solid red is where you have actual boots on the ground. What's up, Eric? Solid red, boots on the ground. And the lightly shaded red, you have reason to believe there's influence within Wagner. Now, this map, the reason why I say it's outdated is because Burkina Faso, we do know that Wagner does help out and work within Burkina Faso. And so I'm just showing you this map so you realize that Wagner does have a large footprint in Africa. And pretty much everywhere Wagner is, the United States counters them within other countries, to include the French and the United Nations. I think I have another map here that shows. Yeah, and also, again, we're getting to the segue part where why Wagner's in Africa and what is really happening. Russia has always had ties to Africa, but they were never one of the main guys for colonialism. Russia and Africa, and Putin even admitted himself recently, we've never really given Africa a chance. We've never really looked into Africa for whatever reason. That's a good thing, maybe. But nonetheless, where you have these little foot soldiers is where, again, you have boots on the ground. And where you have these little shields is where you have military pacts. We're cool with you, Russia, and you're cool with us. So again, Russia going into Africa was never always the game plan for Wagner, but there was always a relationship enough for Russia to go into Africa when you evaluate and look at the ties of Wagner Group in Russia. Now, after going through a brief history of Syria, now all of a sudden you have the man himself, Prigozhin. This guy became super popular. Anybody who's been following the conflict in Ukraine, this guy just exploded up into social media space. Very outspoken, very out there. And this used to be the head of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. he was in charge, almost like a, what's the word? He kind of reminds me of like a Julius Caesar type, or like a Roman entity where he truly controls, he's truly out there. And I'm not saying he's a good guy, I'm not saying Wagner's good, but I'm trying to like really form a context here of how loved he was by his soldiers. And not only that, he was loved by Russians, because Wagner was making progress in Ukraine. And then, as we all know, the whole mutiny happened. And at this point, Wagner was at the peak of their game. They were probably, this is as strong as they were probably ever going to get. This military group was willing to march to Moscow, not necessarily go after Putin, but go after heads of state, etc. Okay, so as we all know, and if you don't know, at this point, Yevgeny Prigozhin and Putin have a very odd relationship because they used to be best friends. And Putin was not about this life. I mean, these guys were sending tanks to Moscow. As we know, there were fighter pilots who were taken out, Russian fighter pilots who were taken out. So it was not a good deal. Anyway, things got squashed. And then this video comes out about a month later. This is what Yevgeny Prigozhin was promising Africa. And I don't like to generalize Africa, but as I showed you on the map, Russia is everywhere within Africa. Understand this. Wagner was done with Ukraine. They did what they had to do, allegedly. That's what Wagner was saying. So Wagner was about to focus all of their money and efforts into Africa, and that was going to be a really big challenge for the United States and other countries like the French to try and counter what Wagner's doing. And we'll get into why a lot of this is a little confusing, because we're all technically fighting the same people. But again, as I showed you from the World War II explanation, just because you're fighting the same people doesn't mean you guys are necessarily friends. So let's go ahead. I've showed this before, but we might as well get a recap. Looking at the words of what Prigozhin's saying, he's going to be talking about freedom, going to be talking about, I'm here to save you guys.
Работаем. Температура плюс 50. Все как мы любим. ЧВК «Вагнер» проводит РПД. Делает Россию еще более великой на всех континентах. А Африку еще более свободной. Справедливость и счастье для африканских народов. Кошмарим ИГИЛ, Аль-Каиду и других бандосов. Берем на работу настоящих богатырей. И продолжаем выполнение задач, которые были поставлены и которые мы давали.
Okay, so there you go. Tones of freedom, tones of happiness, blah, blah, blah. Somebody asked me really good questions. Are there any other countries outside of Russia who has an entity like Wagner? Yes and no. And this is actually a really good point. Wagner forming is really confusing for a lot of people, because if you ever look into Russian laws, and I don't know why you ever would, but this is what I do for a living, about the 90s, Russia actually has a law saying you can't have any PMCs or like security contracting companies, because as we all know, they could turn on a country, especially a country who doesn't allow certain freedoms that other countries have. When you give one man all the power, the last thing you want is to allow some sort of mutiny like we saw a few months ago. Now, to answer your question, you do have mercenaries, if you will. Throughout all of time, you've always had contractors, mercenaries, people who are willing to work for money without any emotions involved. So yes and no. The most obvious one I could think of was Blackwater during Iraq, and I think they're called Academy now. I think they're still around, but the United States is plagued with them. I mean, the first thing you do after the U.S. Army, if you're in a combat role like I was, you go to see, are there any people hiring? Maybe I can get an easy job securing like an oil rig. So yeah, I would say almost every single country has fighters for hire, contractors. They don't like to be called mercenaries. Okay, so we saw this right here, and as we all know now, a couple of days later, this happens, and this right here truly is the beginning of the downfall for Russian conquest in Africa.
Это беспилотник. Сбили, бабахнуло в 2 раза, взорвалось, падает.
Hey, I got to cut this off real quick. Thank you for the $10 donation, bro. I always think it's funny that organizations like Wagner have media coordinators and video editors. Great job, T-SPLY. Thank you so much. Yes. And just to comment on that real quick, and please, guys, like the live stream, and thank you so much for the donation. Wagner, we always hear about Russian trolls and fake news. Wagner has admitted to being creating troll farms or social media farms to help with misinformation in countries. And we'll actually get to that here pretty fast, or pretty soon. But let's this right here is the turning point. This is Prigozhin's jet.
Смотри, падает.
Okay, so now many people speculate Russia is the cause for the jet crash, but nonetheless, we now have the man who is promising freedom, promising all these things for Africa. He's now gone. The difference is between a lot of organizations is that usually if like the top guy is gone, you will have like 4 people to replace him. But for whatever reason, Wagner really put their faith and trust in this one man. Like everybody was about this guy. But the biggest reason why Wagner had so much power is because they really had the backing of Russia. Wagner is Russia, Russia is Wagner. And that it's not only this guy right here, it's Russia. But now that they don't have the backing of Russia, this is why we start to see the downfall. You have to understand what Wagner does is when they go into these African countries, they're pulling the whole colonial card. I mean, this has been done hundreds of years ago, and in the short term, it works, but in the long term, it does not work. But for people who are living in the moment and today, these Wagner could care less. They're trying to get paid now and get out of there. And so you have countries like Mali who have an abundance of gold, a lot of gold in Mali. That's why there's a lot of fighting. Unfortunately, for countries with a lot of gold, you have a lot of issues. And so Wagner will strike up a deal with you that you don't need to necessarily pay us, but since Wagner is Russia and Wagner has the backing of Russia, we will come into your country and we will do whatever it takes to defend your country. And in case there is a coup or something, we will back you up and we will fight for you. I have a prime example right here. The country of Sudan. Recently, Sudan has been going under a lot of violence to the point where the United States has actually had to pull out of Sudan. We don't have an embassy there. Now, there was a lot of confusion in the country of Sudan who Wagner and Russia are tied to because eventually arms were going to run out, people were going to get tired, and there was a peace deal on the table. If you guys go back and recall what's been happening in Sudan, within the first 2 weeks of conflict, really even days, many people speculated, well, there's going to be peace soon, and the rebel groups are saying we're going to have peace soon. But then there's a realization that no one's running out of ammo, no one's running out of motivation because Russia keeps stockpiling and keeps sending arms to Sudan to help rebel groups to try taking back Sudan. So again, this is what Wagner does when they come to your country. They need your country to be destabilized. They need it to be bad because if not, Wagner doesn't have a job. Wagner is there to protect and secure your country. If your country is protected and secure, you don't have more troops coming in to get paid more. And so, I love these charts. We love charts on this channel. When you look at 2020 Mali, Wagner was not there yet. You had the French, who I'm not about to sit here and say that the French are great at what they do, but the French were doing an okay job. And you have the UN, 2020. These little dots right here represent an attack or some sort of wrongdoing from militant groups to civilians. You guys probably can't see this right here. Let me make myself. Oh, yeah. You have 376 attacks. Okay? Recorded attacks. Could be more than that. Go up to 2021. You go from 376 to 600. Still, the French and the UN are trying to do the best they can to contain it. Down here in the south, you see these little circles right here. This is a buffer zone because this is where all the gold is, and that's where you're going to have the most security. Now in 2022, as most of you guys probably guessed what was going to happen, you have Wagner coming into the country. Wagner has a lot more influence, and Wagner is also performing a lot of their own attacks on Mali, their own citizens. And throughout the board, if you go to Burkina Faso, if you go to any country, Sudan, there's a violence uptick. It goes up. And so this right here is probably one of the biggest factors as to why Russia is losing their own battles in Africa and why you have Wagner fighters getting ambushed and taken out. Wagner is creating their own destabilization in these countries, but the issue is the United States also is dealing with it in neighboring countries because all these militant groups are just crossing borders. They're border hopping left and right. So they're creating this vacuum of violence, and the United States is having to deal with it, but Wagner also is having to deal with it. As long as this, hey, we have another $10 donation. Thank you so much for the donation. Just a reminder to everyone to like the stream. Yes, please like the stream. Thank you so much for the support and donation. I love doing this live for you guys, and we still got a lot more to go. So please, guys, like the stream. It's free. Appreciate all of you. Also at this time now, 2023 today, as we know, the French are gone. The UN is about to be gone. All of this is the major influence of Wagner. And you'll also realize this. Again, we have the proof and evidence, people. Notice all of the attacks are happening outside this bubble. As far down as 2020, this bubble has always been protected. You guys all know what's in that bubble. That's where the gold's at. As long as that bubble is protected and all those attacks happen outside that bubble, Wagner could care less. The only issue is for Wagner, the more and more they only secure this bubble, the more and more the country gets worse and worse, and the more and more Wagner will keep getting attacked and keep getting ambushed. And again, this is a direct correlation to where this also affects the United States, because all of these guys are fighting the same people. And I know this sounds pretty absurd that you have Wagner and Wagner and the United States fighting the same people, but it's the truth. That's why the United States is in Niger, Africa right now. Now, of course, the French are essentially being kicked out of every country that they used to colonize. And to be fair, the French, a lot of these treaties were ended in the 60s where there was no more colonization and you have independence. But the French, where they messed up, they try to keep influence in this country, in these countries. And so, again, Wagner does not want to work with anything French, does not want to work with anything USA or UN. They need all these entities out of the country. So every country that you see where you have the French being kicked out, you have Western assets being kicked out, it's just another cause for concern for these African countries who are going to create more vacuums of power for these militant groups, especially the UN. Now, this right here is actually the biggest reason as to why I think the Russians and the United States are struggling to keep any sort of stability in the region. Does anybody know what this region's called? Anybody at all? This is the portion where I asked the stream something. Who knows what this portion of Africa is called? There we go. The Sahel. The Sahel region is the most underrated, most dangerous place on Earth. And so think about this. When the head of Wagner is out, Russia's not backing Wagner. Wagner's already destabilizing the most unstable place on planet Earth. Do you really think operations are going to go as planned anywhere in any of these countries? Do you really think that? Especially in Sudan right now, and especially in Mali and Burkina Faso. If I showed you a graph of Burkina Faso, it literally looks like somebody's making a pepperoni pizza of all the little spots of where these attacks are happening, which is not a good thing. Not at all. Now, just a quick side note, you'll notice Niger is smack dab in the middle of the Sahel. That's why the United States is strategically placed in Niger. Now, I have reason to believe that they're going to end up leaving and go to Nigeria because Nigeria is the most stable country within all these countries. But yeah, the United States is placed right in Niger, Mali, and Chad, and Sudan. All have Wagner. So again, Prigozhin's out, Russia's out. Russia sort of backs Wagner, but they really don't. How are they going to sustain an attack and their mission in the most volatile region in the world? When I say the Sahel is bad, when you go look at the data, the Sahel accounts for 43% of all attacks in the world. That's more than the attacks combined in the Middle East. Now, if you are a U.S. citizen, we're all brought up to believe that the Middle East is the worst place on earth. These are where all the attacks happen. It's where a lot of attacks happen. But one place that you really need to be focusing on if you're into this type of geopolitics is that these attacks are really happening in the Sahel. And I don't like to generalize Africa. Africa, I always say this, it has an abundance of cultures and different countries. But these countries in particular, when we say Africa, I'm talking about the Sahel region where it's really going down. Now, the United States and the Russians, they're fighting each other indirectly, mainly in this power vacuum here between Niger and Mali, and especially in Sudan. Russia has managed to kick out the United States in Sudan without even fighting the United States, which I think might be a first. For those of you who don't know, at the beginning of the Sudan conflict, probably a few months ago, We had an evacuation of Sudan. It was really big news because the United States had no idea what was going on, and they also didn't know how they were going to evacuate the country. A lot of that was in part to the fact that, hey, Wagner and Russia keep supplying the rebels in Sudan. All is good. Kick the U.S. out. Now, I'm going to leave this as the last reason. The last reason why I truly think Russia is struggling in the Sahel, and I could be wrong, you can let me know, is because the United States is countering every action of Russia. When Russia says the U.S. is bad, the U.S. comes in and says, we're good. The other thing is this. Russia is fighting for resources. They're fighting for gold. They're fighting for oil. They're fighting for a lot of these different types of resources. And the last thing I ever want to do is just because I was an American and I am, and just because I was in the U.S. Army, I don't want to be the U.S. Army hype man or the hype boy and give out fake news. I always try to be down the middle. But in this case, the United States truly is in Niger to combat the bad guys. And the main reason why we have evidence for this is because almost immediately after the attacks in 2001, those really bad attacks you can't say on here, that happened in September, the United States was immediately like, we need to go to Africa. We need to go to the Sahel. All right? And it wasn't to get any gold. They weren't in Mali to get gold. They were in the Sahel because if you're going to fight the bad guy, you're going to go to the fight, the worst part of the world, the Sahel. Because even back then, it was a terrible place. So yeah, Mr. Prigozhin was the guy to go into Africa to create these relationships. This photo right here is also interesting because there was a summit that Russia had in St. Petersburg. About a week or two before the plane crash, Prigozhin was shaking hands with a lot of African leaders right next to Putin himself. President Putin promising free grain, promising free money. The issue is Russia is not the ones who have boots on the ground. Wagner are the ones who have boots on the ground. So logistically speaking, they are the ones who were going to bring the money, bring the free grain, bring all this stuff to these regions. But now that Wagner can't even complete their missions in places like Mali or Sudan, this mission's coming to a wrap, people. Unless somehow Russia can figure out or try to prop somebody up to the top of these PMC groups. Because there's other groups out there besides Wagner. But Wagner, they were the ones who were truly all over Africa. I don't see how Russia is going to recover from this. And I also don't see how Russia is going to have enough trust outside of their government to allow a civilian to create another strong military, because the last thing Putin wants is for all of them to turn on Putin like they did back in the mutiny. So, yeah, remember this. Russia does have a very strong footprint in Africa. I'm not about to sit here and say, oh, it's totally over. That's it. Africa's done. Russia's done. They still have legal treaties and they still have friends in Africa. But as far as the Wagner mission, especially in the Sahel, when you do this whole strategy of colonialism and you're going in there for the quick money and getting out, these countries will turn on you. They all turn on the French. They all turn on pretty much every single European country who tried to pull the same card. We're going to come in here. We're going to help you. We're going to make you a better country. It never ends up happening. And the only people who truly suffer are the Africans themselves. So, yeah, that is what's currently going on in Africa. And I truly stand by, I think that Wagner, their mission is coming not to an end, but definitely is failing. Especially considering right now you have these militant groups who are literally ambushing and attacking Wagner fighters. It never used to be like that. Wagner would get down and dirty, but they typically won't lose battles, and they definitely don't lose drones. You have drones that have been captured. So, yeah. Any questions from the panel? Prigozhin got them, daddy. Digicam in the desert, yeah. Yes, everybody, please like the live. Appreciate you. Thank you. Should we like the stream? Yes. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Hope you guys all learned something. Hope you guys actually like the stream, as in besides clicking, but actually liking it. Wagner can't find a new top guy. Wagner was the first to say during the memorial of Prigozhin that Prigozhin is not the only top guy. We have other top people, but let's be honest, the way Wagner operates is not only like fighting on the ground, they're really good at social media, and Prigozhin too. I kind of think Prigozhin's like the Vince McMahon of contracting companies. He like goes out there and he really sells his company to where you actually think Wagner are a bunch of great people, but they're not. They're a bunch of thugs. Thank you, Eric. I'm eating pizza and I'll serve. Who's going to poke the bear? I don't think anyone is. What's going on with the French embassy? The French are still, quote unquote, being held hostage. I might do a video on that. We'll see. Mohamed Bazoum, who's the president of Niger, is currently under trial. He's suing Niger. I don't know how that's legal. The John Cena of mercenaries. Oof. Definitely the guy who used to run Blackwater. He got away with so much. North Korea, boots on the ground, 100%. And Ukraine, for sure. I actually think it would be advantageous for North Korea to work with the Russians. I hope they don't. I don't want them to. But it would give North Korea combat experience. North Korea has zero combat experience since the 50s, 60s maybe? Putin wants someone under his thumb. I agree. Okay. Need the T-SPLY top 10 wrestlers live stream. Number 1, Rob Van Dam. Number 2, Undertaker. Number 3, Sandman. Number 4, The Rock. Number 5, Stone Cold. Number 6, Umaga. Number 7, putting me on the spot, Kane. Number 8, Hulk Hogan. Number 9, Shawn Michaels. Number 5, is this a good list? I don't even know. I can't think of the last one. Umaga, wild pick. Umaga, underrated. Go look up Umaga highlights and tell me that guy was not epic. No, Wagner will never be as strong. They're done. Because the reason why Wagner was so strong is because that was the one guy outside the government who Putin could trust. That was his former chef. And he never thought he'd turn on him. The French Legion. Do you think the French Foreign Legion will become involved? Yes, I do. I think that's going to be the force who goes into Niger, or at least to go and save. The French have every ability to go and save their guy at the embassy. They're just not doing it because it looks better for the media. Top 5 rappers in the Toronto areas. Drake. The Legion needs to if France wants to be taken seriously, yes. And the Legion has been highly involved in a lot of activities in Africa. Is it true that the U.S. has now teamed up with working with... built, I mean, they did for the evacuation of Afghanistan, yeah. I don't agree. Nobody agrees with that tactic, but that's what happens, and that's why we had the really bad incident with the U.S. Marines. Number 10, Rey Mysterio. Good call. Thank you. There actually, and I don't even want to say the name. Never mind. Almost said something very controversial. Where's the homie who always throws you off? Kind of sad he didn't come. Hey, it's all good. I love when you guys donate. You're like, sorry for throwing you off. I'm like, thank you. I have to like literally think in my head, please don't stutter when I'm doing this. And I'm telling you guys, I don't have a script, by the way. I just do it off like my dome. I hope that I have things in place and I hope it doesn't lag too much. I'm like, I think I'll remember what happens. I'll just start talking. Yeah, Eric. It's Eric. I would actually put him in the top 3. I'm not going to lie. I seen him wrestle live too. Craziest thing ever. But yeah. As a wrestler, yes. As a human, no. Love the after chat. Yeah, after chat. Welcome to afterchat.com. Hey, if you're here and you like the after chat, please like the live. Yeah, I do seem like a flying headbutt guy, and I saw him do it in real life, and I saw Batista versus Undertaker. They don't even look like real people. They look like video game characters in real life. Yeah, I am not reading a script, clearly. If I read a script, first off, if you've been watching my lives long enough, when I start reading, I start laughing because I'll mess one word up. And I'm like, oh, it's over from here. I got to do it off my head. Atomic elbow? I don't know. Yeah, steroids bad. Like the live. I love to see the fearless thumb Kim Young waddle around a combat zone. I don't think he will ever be doing that. I mean, technically he has on the border, the DMZ, right? I don't think anything will happen with that. T-SPLY will walk up friendly into a handshake to a headbutt. Dang right, with this forehead, you gotta. Chernobyl power plant was the plant took over by Russian soldiers at the beginning of the war. True, but this year they took out Zaporizhzhia power plant. Yes. I actually talked about Chernobyl, I think, today at some point. Any other random questions, comments, concerns? Because I'm about to post this video. Again, YouTube has been very odd to me because I've been doing a lot of live streams, a little behind the scenes. Because I've been doing a lot of live streams, it sort of messed up my regular video views and like getting the videos out there, which is fine, but it's also kind of annoying. And so that's why I'm like, you have to like the live, because if you guys don't like the live, YouTube thinks you guys all hate me. It's so stupid. It used to be like 2 weeks ago, I'd be like, hey, what's up, everybody? I don't care what you do. Yes, Fluent. Will you continue this after chat format? Yeah, I'll continue after chat formats if the video is going to be like over 30 minutes. Yeah. If it's like a 13 to 14 minute video, I just try to chill out. Anything else? If not, I'm about to get off this. I don't know, I have a country accent. All right. Much love, everybody. Thank you for being here. Love you all. Thank you for the donations. Thank you for throwing me off. And as you guys know, I'm going to end this stream and post a video. Please go like and comment on that posted video. It helps me out a lot. I know it's obnoxious as heck, but it does help me out a lot. So thank you guys for everything. Thank you for being here. Love you all, and I hope we all learned something. Peace out.